Donkey Kong Country 3's enemies are a drastic departure from the previous two games. Not so much in terms of gameplay, but definitely when it comes to their visual design. The enemies of DKC2 were very much continuations of the archetype set before, often using the exact same Kremlings, now in pirate getup. Those same archetypes largely exist in DKC3, but now they're filled by an entirely new roster of Kremlings, most of which will never be seen outside of this game. And that's a drag because so many of them are amazing designs, rivaling the classics. This video is all about them. This is part 49 of Overthinking Donkey Kong Country 3. Same as last time, we're going to go over every single enemy in the game, starting with the worst and ending with the least worst. Before we get into it, special mention goes to Neek from DKC2, who, for a time, was in the pre-release build of DKC3 and could be seen in an early commercial. He's the only enemy to have been carried over as far as I can tell, and he worked surprisingly well in the middle level. Okay, that's it. Onto the list for reals. Might seem like a cop-out entry, but the lowest entries on these lists often are. The Killer Bees show up in Riverside Race as motivation for the Kongs to get their butts in gear. They have been said to be miniature red buzzers, but I can't find any evidence of that. That's pretty much it. They're more obstacle than enemy, they suck, and they barely deserve a mention. Croc is much in the same boat, and what's worse, he never actually appears on screen. He's a crosshair that bothers you throughout Krack-shot Croc. He's a great level gimmick, but a pretty ineffective enemy. There's talk of Croc being named Crosshair, and of being this guy, but Croc's right there in the name, and this dude can be seen in the pre-release footage as the original Carbine, so that rules that out. Croc is one of the few enemies from the DKC trilogy to return in DK64, and the only one from DKC3. Bazza sucks ass. He only appears in one level, Bazza's Barricade, where he's the main attraction. Like the previous two entries, he's less enemy and more obstacle, and it's hard to get excited about him. I mean, unless you're Troy McClure. He's low on the list, but I do like the yellow Nid. He can't hurt you, but he can bounce you into something that will. The yellow Nid bounces constantly in a looping pattern, sometimes straight up, sometimes from left to right. His render makes him look stoned as shit. Honestly, I don't really like Booty Bird that much. Gross design, shit name. What I do like about Booty Bird is what it brings to the gameplay. It's essentially a living treasure chest, and it needs to be hit with a barrel or something to get what's inside. It's been said that they're based on robins, and looking at it now, the markings are like a cross between the European robin and the American robin. Later on, Booty Bird is repurposed as a common enemy, kinda like how Buzz is used, and they're surprisingly good as pinch hitters for the aerial team. The red Nid differs from the yellow in that he's stationary until the Kongs step on him. He's not really any better than the yellow Nid, I just think he looks cooler. Fun fact, the boss of Kremwood Forest, the home of the Nids, is a giant spider named Arik. Combine the names of the two spiders and you get Arachnid. Okay, it's not that fun. Bounty Bass is the aquatic version of Booty Bird, and they're fine, I guess. Again, kinda gross, but I like them more than Booty Bird, and they fit the aesthetic slightly better. That's all. These guys are fucking gross. They're a sea monster's genital wart. I hate them. They're mostly stationary enemies, and the trick is to hit them with on guard when they're open, so timing's the key. I think what they add to the gameplay is great, and probably a little understated, and in a weird way, I consider them to be one of the most iconic enemies in the game. Iconic doesn't mean good. You just know these fuckers are carrying the plague. What can I say about Sneak? They're this game's naughty, this game's Neek. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, during development, Neek was used as the placeholder enemy. So it's entirely possible Sneak was whipped out towards the end of development without much thought put into it. That's not giving him enough credit though. His design is great, just simple and a bit gross, but it does the trick. I like how they interplay with Ellie, but I think they're subjectively the worst of the standard low tier enemies in the trilogy. Missile Shell's a weird one. It's less an enemy and more a projectile shot out by a boss. It's got its own render, and it's got a name, even if the name is more description than anything. But all that said, they're actually pretty cool. The way they work is they pursue you through the water for a few seconds, before flashing yellow and staying in place, after which they'll lock onto you and launch in your direction. You've got to dodge them in the first half, then get them in a good position for when they stop, then get between them and the boss, bar boss, so that when they launch, if you move out of the way, it'll be friendly fire. There's nothing like that in DKC or DKC2. Yeah, maybe they're a bit lackluster, and maybe the bar boss fight is frustrating at times, but full marks for creativity. The pink lurchin is also exclusive to the bar boss fight, and they function as bodyguards, keeping on guard away from bar boss's weak point. They stay clammed up, so the only way to take them out is with other enemies. Another super creative idea DKC3 brings to the table, but they're only this far up the list because I think the pink looks cool. There's something cozy about the knickknacks. Unlike a bunch of enemies in DKC3, Knickknack has that same vibe a lot of DKC enemies had, that they were just chilling in their native environment before the Kongs and Kremlings showed up. As their name might suggest, they're basically this game's click-clack. Bounce off their backs and you can pick them up and throw them like a barrel. They sorta look like Christmas beetles, but they've always reminded me of ladybugs, especially the red ones. The red knickknacks are different in that they fly. They're essentially the neckies or flitters of DKC3. They're fine. I think they look cool. Cocos take the concept of clownfish very literally, and I fucking hate it. They've got the red nose and white pancake makeup of clowns, but they're fish. Cocos replaced Flotsam, which in turn replaced Bite Size and Chomps. Cocos are easily the worst of the bunch, but I don't know, they're okay. The orange or red Coco is slightly more dangerous in that they move back and forth. I don't know what else you want from me. The latest in a long line of like Donkey Kong Country 2 but worse enemies, Bristle is just DKC3's version of DKC2's Spiny. They're similar to, say, Claptrap in that they're your basic ground enemy but are invulnerable from a certain direction. While the Chompy Boys can be stomped but not rolled into, Bristles is the opposite. You can attack him head on, but not from above or behind. Actually, come to think of it, Bristles might be a better version of Spiny. I mean, he's not the nightmare fuel that the Porcupine is, and he fits in with his game's overall environment better. Bristles scores extra points for having an alternate rolling form, and for being a bit of a cutie. Still not very imaginative or anything, but he's cool, and he suits the Northern Cremisphere setting really well. Clasp is such a great idea for an enemy. Take Knocker, cram him full of dynamite, and make him play on the monkey bars at recess. It's not a matter of if something's gonna happen, but when. I'm also a fan of Clasp's overall design. I'm a simple man, and sometimes all it takes is a good old-fashioned palette swap to make me happy. Clasp is a bit of a pain in the ass at times, but I can chalk at least some of that up to lag. I don't know if it's unique to my copy of the game or what, but certain moments of Donkey Kong Country 3 lag for me, and creeping clasps is one of them. I don't really have anything else to say, they're just cool and I like them a lot. Swoopy is barely in the game, but they're an interesting concept for an enemy. At first, they swoop at the Kongs, and when they miss, they become lodged into the wall, creating platforms to reach higher areas. That alone is pretty cool, but later on, in Swoopy Salvo, they become the aerial equivalent of Bazza, forming unending chains of enemies that create barriers. I'd argue they actually beat Bazza at his own game, as there are diagonal barriers of Swoopies, as well as some creative uses, like having to fly against the tide of enemies to reach a bonus barrel. They fit really well into the world of DKC3, and if anything, they probably could have been used a bit more. Gleam and Bream is a palette-swapped bounty bass that illuminates the level when you poke it. That's a sentence I don't think anyone's ever said before. They look nothing like Bream, just as bounty bass looks nothing like a bass. Honestly, I have no idea what kind of fish they're based on, if any. They look cool. They're okay. They're this game's equivalent of Squawks in Torchlight Trouble or Glimmer in Glimmer's Galleon. And they are a great analogy for how the third entry of the DKC trilogy kinda shits itself. Green Coco is like the orange one, except it's stationary. It's higher up the list because I think the green looks cooler. That's it. Next. I don't really like these guys, but they're arguably one of the most unique enemy ideas in the entire trilogy, and they deserve to be celebrated for it. They're some of, maybe the, strongest Kremlings ever, barring some DK64 outliers, and they only ever appear in the Lost World, so many players, myself included, might have been a bit surprised to see them in the roll call after beating K. Rool for the first time. They have a few different attacks, from charging to leapfrogging. I guess that's all. If you take one of them out with Squidder, the other one will often kinda go nuts, which I think is because they weren't programmed for solo commands or whatever. I don't know. Green Buzz had some big shoes to fill. Zinger is one of the only enemies to have survived the transition from DKC to DKC2, and as a result, I don't think it's crazy for me to say it's one of the top tier DK enemies. It's one of the most recognizable and has reappeared in a slew of other games since. Green Buzz is another of DKC3's same but different and slightly worse analogues, but that isn't to say that Buzz is bad. I quite like them. They are, for all intensive purposes, just Zinger, but they're like if a wasp fucked a Harley Davidson and gave birth to a table saw. I'm not apologizing for that previous sentence. Buzz is the game's first hint at the broader theme of industrialization and the inconsistent technology aesthetic. Also, when I was a kid, I always thought their chrome legs were like exhausts. Blue Bazza can be seen in some pre-release footage, and funnily enough, the official Bazza render is still blue. But aside from the different head shape, it wasn't going to be any different to the one we got. Maybe they changed the color so that Bazza will stick out more against the blue background. I don't care. The only fish known to shit dark matter, Nibbler is one of the more interesting enemies of DKC3, and arguably the most interesting aquatic enemy in the trilogy. I suppose that bar's not super high, but whatever. Nibbler patrols just beneath the surface of the water, and will make quick work of the Kongs if they so much as set a toe in. I suppose he's got a lot in common with Snapjaw from DKC2, now that I think about it. For their third and final appearance, Fish Food Frenzy, a single Nibbler becomes an unlikely ally. He's blue, and kinda looks like a happy dog or something. But like your mum, his appetite is insatiable. And if you don't keep him fed with a steady supply of shushis and sashimis,
I think I'm having a panic attack.
he'll turn nasty. Pink Buzz is just red zinger. They're like the green ones, but almost completely invincible. Not sure what else there is to say. They're considered red, but they look pink, and with DKC3 diverting from the path set by DKC and DKC2 in a lot of ways, I feel like green and pink make for a good change from yellow and red. I don't want to get too tinfoil hat here, but it's possible that the reason Zingers didn't get a role in the third game is after killing Queen Bee and King Zing, they died out, hence the robotic replacements. I know they appear in DK64, but who knows what the case was during development. Lemguin has the distinction of being the first penguin enemy in the DK franchise. The Lem part of their name refers to lemmings, which I think is a comment on their attack pattern more than anything. Lemguin's yet another original enemy idea in DKC3. The closest thing to an analog they have in the earlier games would be the barrels thrown by Mankey Kong, as they serve a similar purpose. I love these dudes, and their render is so cute. The game underuses and undersells them. I'd be stoked to see them come back, but like so many deserving characters in this trilogy, it's not gonna happen. Coin's another super creative and cool character idea that we won't ever see again. The thing about Coin is I feel like without a DK coin to defend, there's no reason to keep him around. Coin's right there in the name. This is a flimsy argument though, as I feel like it wouldn't be too hard to just restructure their design and identity around their shields. Maybe even give them a new name, the way Clump becomes canon in DKC2, despite being the same dude. Coin has the distinction of being the only enemy to show up in every single level of DKC3, and by extension, is the most common enemy in the entire trilogy, at least in terms of appearances. That's pretty cool, sort of. I mean, Zinger appears in more levels, but it's across 2 games and 5 variations, so I don't think that should count. I'll be honest with you. Krimp's as high as he is because he's one of the few enemies that can be considered a reincarnation of a DKC archetype. I don't really think his design, or anything about him really, is that good, but being another link in the chain that began with Claptrap and continued with Clampon gets him pretty far up the list. I mean, he's not bad or anything, but when it comes to DKC3, I just cling hard to anything that connects it back to the rest of the trilogy. That lack of connection is one of my biggest gripes with this otherwise great game. Carbine is so cool. They're owls with giant guns. Enough said. Like the buzzers, they seem to be partially robotic, which makes me think that maybe they were made by Baron K. Rulenstein himself. And like buzzers, the extent of which is debatable, as their render has them fully robotic, while their in-game sprites look almost entirely organic. It's not important. They're such a cool enemy concept too. They exist in the background layer, shooting projectiles from the background into the level and out through the foreground, adding a literal new dimension to the level's obstacles. Pretty sure you can't say that word anymore. These dudes are just explosive knockers. They're kabooms from DKC2, but in DKC3. Except they're not in DKC3 at all. We see them swinging from ropes as clasp, but this, arguably more normal form, doesn't show up in the game. They're in the game's files, and they had a render made, but for whatever reason, they didn't make the final cut. My guess is there was just no place for them, and no sense in using them if they don't add to the gameplay. Luckily, they get their time in the sun in the Game Boy Advance port, in the New World Pacifica, where they're used to full effect in stormy seas, and they're great. Look, I just think the green barrel looks really cool. As we've established by now, it doesn't take much to make me happy. He's just Clobber from DKC2, but with a new hat. Like in DKC2, Nock is used really creatively, seen in levels where pits and hazards abound. That's all I've got to say. It might seem weird that Cobble, arguably the least interesting Kremling in both gameplay and design, is in the top 10, but he is. First of all, his design is great. Second, I think you can tell a lot about a game by its basic enemy, and Cobble fits the critter archetype for DKC3 perfectly. Third, he's only in 3 levels. That's criminal. If you're still not convinced, imagine if a bunch of ice cream places made a list of their top 10 flavors. Despite being the least interesting, vanilla would make the cut every time. Why is that? I think context. Vanilla's a canvas for other flavors to work on. Vanilla's a jumping off point for more intense flavors. Vanilla's laid back, familiar, comforting. It's the low to something like chocolate's high. Vanilla's a fundamental. And before you do anything, first you have to get the fundamentals right. And cobbles are the same. You can't have every enemy be Nibbler or Copter or something. Gotta start simple and work from there. This is a terrible entry, but Cobble's earned his spot in the top 10, and I wish we got more of him. Skitter's the same, a palette swap of Cobble who only appears in the snow levels. He serves the same purpose as Cobble, but sorta looks different doing it. He's also only in 3 levels. He's also fantastic. I also wish we got more of him too. Skitter's also one of the only real palette swap enemies in the game. The original DKC was full of them. I don't know what's up with Skitter and Cobble's lip ring. Someone at Rareware really got into piercings for a few years there. Another DKC3 palette swap is Coindozer. He's a coin without the coin, and he charges at the Kongs when they get close, knocking them into pits. He's an amazing concept for an enemy, and because we've seen Coin all throughout the game, we come into Coindozer Clamber with some level of understanding of how to deal with this new enemy. He could have been in more levels, but by the time Coindozer Clamber is over, I'm pretty happy to be rid of him. Crumple is DKC3's answer to Crusher. He's a big tough guy that Dixie harmlessly bounces off of. At least in DKC3, we've got Kitty. In 2, Dixie and Diddy were useless against Cruncher. Crumple is a stupid name, but he's a really cool looking character who I'd love to see return somehow. He's barely in DKC3 as well, which seems like a crime, seeing as he's one of the main archetype gremlings. Aside from the shaders used on his skin, Crumple arguably looks the most like the classic gremlings out of anyone in DKC3, with the possible exception of Cobble. Being blue and extremely top heavy, it's possible that, just as Canon is a reskinned Clump, DK64's Kasplat is Crumple with a costume change. I looked, but there's really nothing else to say about him. He's great, I wish we got more of him, but like all the characters here, we won't. The only completely scrapped enemy on the list. Carbine was originally this metal monkey dude. He has his own render and can be seen in pre-release footage of the game, so he made it pretty far into production before being redesigned. As for why he was redesigned at all, I have no idea. There isn't a clear reason for it. It's not like the design was offensive or not up to snuff or whatever, so it beats me why they essentially finished the character, then remade him from the ground up. It's a shame they were scrapped, because I feel like they're one of the better looking enemies in the game, and in my own weird headcanon, could have joined Mankey and Minky as reject Kongs. Kachaka is a stupid name, and the enemy is really a bit forgettable. They appear in 1 level and 1 level only, and all they do is throw bombs. They can't run around and can't be picked up. They're in the top 5 because they're purple and I think they look cool. It's my list. I used to hate these guys, but while making this series, I grew to love them. Minky Kong's in-game appearance doesn't do him justice. He actually looks pretty cool, and if we got sequels to the DKC trilogy, I'd love to see him return as a good guy. Not before Mankey though. Imagine if we got sequels with Mankey, Minky, and the original Carbine as playable characters. I feel like a lot of people would hate that, but I'd be in heaven. Minky Kong is likely based on Gibbons and only appears in the 1 level, which feels criminal to me. Copter is so cool. On paper he makes no sense, but he adds so much to the levels he's in, and he just looks cool as hell. I suppose he's an offshoot of Cutlass, and could even have originally been the same model, judging by the eyes and teeth, but whatever. The parallels between 2 giant swords and 2 handheld propellers helps as well. Cool fact about Copter is in the game's codes hides an unused standing animation, so maybe he was going to be a more versatile enemy at one point. There's a death animation too, and it looks like he would have been knocked out of the sky, so who knows what was planned for him during development. I don't give a shit about Barrel Blast, but it deserves some props, no pun intended, for bringing Copter back for one last ride. Bazooka also resembles Cutlass, though I wasn't the first to make that observation, and unlike Copter, it's clear Bazooka isn't the same model with a new coat of paint. Bazooka's a relatively small gremlin with a relatively big gun. He's Donkey Kong Country 3's canon, and that's all he needs to be. His gun has a laser sight, and I always thought that was cool. I wish I had more to say, but what else is there? He's an awesome design, and one of my all-time favorite gremlins. For whatever reason, I've noticed that I have a soft spot for the orange gremlins. In DKC2's enemy list, Klinger ranked really high. In this list, Bazooka is the second, and Recoil is the first. I don't know what to tell you. He's cool as shit. If you've been watching this series, you know that I'm a big believer in getting the fundamentals right. A game's default enemies should be great, and the more specialized or rare enemies should just be the icing on the cake. Recoil is DKC3's answer to kaboing, which was in turn DKC2's answer to the jumping critters in DKC. That makes Recoil a continuation of one of the earliest enemy types in the series. He's a great incarnation of this simple but effective enemy idea, and he perfectly encapsulates the same but different ethos of DKC3, and just how great the game is when you accept it on its own terms. He was also slated to appear in DK64, which could have been really cool. DK64 definitely missed some of DKC3's unique brand of weirdness. I love Recoil, I love Donkey Kong Country 3, and I love all of you. So that's the bad out of the way. Next, we cover everything I couldn't fit neatly into the previous videos, then we recap the 8 worlds of DKC3 before going into the final fight. Thanks for sticking with me through this stop and start journey. I don't take it for granted.